You good? Thank you. Appreciate it, Doug. The next item is 1863 Pownal Road zone change. I want to be clear to the council why I asked this item stay on the workshop, even though the planning board has tabled action. There are a number of moving parts around this, some purely zoning, some were concerns raised by some residents about the timeline that the city has been under with respect to back taxes and the like. So rather than have this process drag out without the council getting the facts on the table, I figured let's have the workshop. This is not queuing something up for council action because we will only act once we hear from the planning board. But I wanted to give the council the time to hear the facts of the case and take public input as the public had asked. So just to be clear.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. The written information that you have in your packet really covers the zone change as it was proposed by two councilors, which is one way to start that discussion. So I want to kind of run through the history of the property verbally because that wasn't in the packet. Back around 2010, staff found out that the property owner had previously financed the property with two mortgages. So there was a house lot with what everybody thought was approximately 10 acres described in the security documents for the mortgage. And then there was 60-something acres that was still part of the same parcel. The farm had, I think, right around 70 acres in total. So there was 60-something acres that was still part of the same parcel on our tax maps that a separate financial institution had described as security for their mortgage. So the property owner had two mortgages, one of them covering what we thought was about 10 acres of the parcel and the other one covering the rear land. At some point, that property owner was unable to make the payments on their loan, and eventually deeds come through 2 to 3 months after they're recorded at the registry. Eventually, we learned that a foreclosure had caused the split of an approximately a 70-acre parcel with a farmhouse and a barn into two parcels, one of which turns out is less than 10 acres. I think that everybody involved on the front end, including the bank, only because I can't think of any motivation for the bank to split off less than 10 acres as their security. I think everybody intended to meet the 10-acre minimum, and somehow the description that was drafted and used as part of the mortgage documents described a parcel that did not total 10 acres. It included over 8 acres, but from everything we can see, less than 9 acres. We don't have a full survey of it, but that's what it appears to be. So after, and somewhat along the same timeline.
What year was that?
It was right around 2010. I could pull those deeds if you wanted them. The owner also went through some type of a foreclosure process, and that's when the rear property, the 60-something acres, was sold to somebody else and really separated at that point from the larger parcel. At that point, we talked to the banks about the lot size violation, and it seemed like there was probably going to be a resolution because both banks would be better off if they fixed the lot size violation, because that would allow, under the ordinance, that would allow us to issue permits on the lots. When a lot size violation is created, our ordinance doesn't allow us to issue permits until they correct it. Usually that's enough of an incentive to get people to go ahead and swap the land that they need to correct the violation. After that, we really had a choice of either sort of holding those permits hostage because we're not allowed to issue them while there's a zoning violation, or taking legal action to try to force the correction of that zoning violation. Usually with lot size violations, just explaining to the property owners involved that neither property can access permits to make improvements or change uses is enough to get them to work together and fix that problem. We don't. In the 10 years that I've been here, I don't think we've ever taken somebody to court for a lot size violation. They usually resolve based on that permit requirement. After that, Heavenly Love and Ralph Searles purchased the 8 to 9 acre parcel with the farmhouse, and an investment company out of New Hampshire purchased the 60 plus acres at the rear of the parcel. And I believe that Heavenly Love and Ralph Searles knew about the zoning issue at the beginning because staff met with them.
What time was that? When was the date of that sale?
I'd have to double check the dates. I don't know exactly when it sold to them, but it's all in the record as part of the deeds.
Now, the first sale in 2010, or when this actually split off or whatever.
I think the
banks
foreclosure.
involved in that?
I think the foreclosure was 2010.
And there were banks involved in that. There were no surveys that were done, and
There's a description that gives bearings and distances of a parcel that was described as the security for the mortgage with the farmhouse. And from what I recall in the description, it doesn't give an exact acreage, but my assumption is they intended to hit the 10 acre mark because it wouldn't make any sense to have an illegal lot as your collateral on.
To me, I would think they would survey it and verify that before they.
I think somebody made a mistake in the description, and they described a parcel that did not exceed the 10 acre minimum. And we wouldn't review those. I mean, we don't review a recorded mortgage. The lot split really didn't happen until the foreclosure took place. Since then, we've advised both property owners, and I know that they have talked extensively about possibilities for resolving the lot size violation. The owner of the larger lot out back, an investment company from New Hampshire, was working with a company called Weaponcraft LLC that wanted to establish a shooting range on that parcel. They submitted plans. They were queued up to go to the planning board as long as they could resolve the lot size violation. And at that time, for them to spend the money on plans, I think they thought they had a workable solution with the property owner up front to resolve the lot size violation, make both lots buildable or usable under the ordinance again. And for whatever reason, they couldn't reach agreement on resolving the lot size violation. At that point, they knew that the planning board couldn't approve a shooting range, which is something that's allowed as a special exception in the agricultural zone. So they withdrew their application, and I think the discussions have kind of slowed since then. Until recently, we had learned that Gary McFarland was talking with Heavenly Love and Ralph Searles as the owners of the property about possibly paying their back taxes and buying the property from them. And then within the last month or so, that actually happened. They came in, paid their back taxes, and the owners of the property, Heavenly Love and Ralph Searles, turned the property over to Gary McFarland. I don't know exactly what they paid, haven't seen that, but they did, as part of that transaction, pay off all of their overdue taxes.
So can I ask
what I'd like to do is have Eric kind of walk through the history and what the planning board matter. We'll have a couple of questions, but I'd like to allow some public comment, and then we'll get back into some discussion. I think there's some folks here's some questions they may want to ask too. But go ahead.
I was just curious about the shooting range thing. Was that on a larger parcel?
Yes, it was.
And they couldn't do it because they were too small as well?
No, so when you have a parent parcel, essentially, that's split into two parcels, if one of them is illegal, both of them are considered part of that illegal lot split. So you really hold both parcels and not issue permits until they work together, hopefully, to resolve the lot size violation. So that lot meets all of the zoning standards, but it was part of that parent parcel that was part of the illegal lot split. So the manager's office received a proposal from Councillor Walker and seconded by Councillor Gilbert to change the zoning on that parcel, and it mentions looking at both sides of the road. So that's really what was before the planning board at their last meeting, is that zone change. And staff from the beginning has looked at 4 possible options to correct that violation. The first choice, and the one we've recommended all along, was try to swap some land and make both lots meet the minimum lot size. The owners have always had the option of a variance, potentially, but the variance criteria for a lot that was created while the standards are in place. They'd have a really hard time demonstrating that the variance is not due to some inaction of the owner or previous owner, because they described those deeds. Banks caused the split. Maybe they could make a case for that, but most of the attorneys that have looked at it didn't think that there was a strong likelihood of that. And a zone change has always been a possibility, but not one that staff recommended based on, typically for resolving a lot size violation. We don't recommend just changing the zone to do that. So one of the hard things about looking at this proposal is setting all of this history aside and trying to look at the proposed zone change just on the merits of the zone change. Forget about the lot split, forget about the minimum lot size that was required when the lot split happened, and really use the criteria that the comp plan already lays out to give an unbiased, honest consideration to this as a zone change proposal. And I think the planning board really tried to do that. And you have in your packet the criteria that the comp plan committee, the planning board, and the council used to establish residential road strips along the road. And planning board gave that careful consideration. They were concerned about opening up too much development opportunity in that rural area of the city, far from the city center, and the cost of services. And in their discussion, really wanted to hear more about the possibility of the city writing what's called a no action letter that basically says we recognize there's a violation, but we have no intention of taking enforcement action. That doesn't really do a lot because it doesn't bind any future councils or staff from taking enforcement action. And that's essentially what we've done in trying to just not issue permits and use that as the tool to encourage them to correct the lot size violation. So the planning board would like some more information on that. They would also like more information on why staff wouldn't recommend a variance in this situation. And they would like to look at an option. All of the options that we looked at for zone changes considered changing the zoning on both sides of Pownal Road. One of the comp plan criteria suggests that unless there are valid reasons otherwise, then we should typically do both sides of a road if we do one. Planning board's discussion really generated some reasons why they would be concerned about too many house lots being created in that area. So that alone could be enough of a reason to propose a change that only covers the one side of the road. Staff is putting that fifth option together. You have the other four options in your packet for consideration at the next planning board meeting. And the property owner that recently purchased 1863 Pownal Road has offered to even further voluntarily restrict themselves from any future lot splits if that makes the planning board and council more comfortable. So they have since drafted a deed restriction that they would impose on themselves to basically promise that they wouldn't further split the 8-point-something acre lot if the zone change went through that legitimized that lot size.
Quick question before we take some public comment. So there was the split. We've got the house lot and the back lot. Both property owners are interested in making an investment in their property. One, a new business, one, an investment in a house. Did the city ever try to find its way into a mediation role to ensure that we could get investments from both parties, or was it just left to the property owners?
We connected the property owners. They met outside of a city process. We did contact other abutting property owners because they're not the only property owners that could resolve this. There's another abutter that could work with the house lot, swap some land, and resolve it. I think that they wanted to resolve it, but one thing that I think may have influenced either the homeowner at 1863 or the other abutter is that there would not ever be a shooting range as long as this lot size violation existed. And they were very opposed to having a shooting range. So they could essentially hold that other use out of the neighborhood by doing that. And I think they did try. to resolve the violation, but I think some of the motivation may have been that.
Okay, that's helpful. Any opposition to taking some public comment? So if you don't mind, Eric, we'll take some comment. Some may be questions, and what we'll do is we'll allow the questions to be asked. After we take public comment, we'll ask you back up, and we'll kind of work through it.
Thank you.
I'll open the floor for public comment. You just want to introduce yourself and let us know your address.
My name is Heaven Love. I am the previous owner of 1863 Pownal Road. And excuse me if this is hard. To start off, yes, buying the property, I did know that it was a non-conformed lot. I purchased the property because it was going to become a foster home. I had somebody coming from Pennsylvania to foster who grew up on a farm. So I figured this was the best place for him to be. I did have a meeting with Eric Cousins, Fontaine Realty, Janice Holding Company, which was what the abutters, and myself. We had a meeting. It was agreed that this land would be conformed upon me purchasing it. No matter what, this land would be conformed. So the only way you could buy it is if you bought it cash because you couldn't get a bank loan on the property. So it was purchased, putting a loan on another piece of property. After purchasing the property, that is when I found out that there was a gun range that was going to be put out back. And that the only way that they would conform my lot now is if I gave them my land to put a city road. And I contacted Eric Cousins in regards to why they needed so much land, what this was about. He said because they needed a city road to get to their shooting range. I said never once did I get told about a shooting range, or was I going to purchase land that a shooting range was put behind it. So I asked Eric what I could do besides that. He told me the only thing you could do is get land from the abutters. There was no other option for me to conform this lot. I said, okay. So I went and I saw Cindy at John F. Murphy Homes, and I spoke with her in regards to conforming this lot. I guess I could have gotten an easement from them. She said that she couldn't make the okay on getting an easement with the property, but she knew nothing about the shooting range, so she was going to bring it up to John F. Murphy Homes. And I got in contact with other abutters across the street, and there was no luck there. All in the meantime, I'm getting letters for taxes, and I'm like, well, you guys aren't letting me do anything with my property. Eric Cousins assured me that the only thing I could do was go to the abutters, get the land. That's the only thing I could do. He said there was no chance of ever getting it rezoned, no chance of ever getting it conformed the way that it was. The only thing that I could do out of the 5 years of owning that property was to get somebody to either give me an easement of property or buy a purchase property off somebody else. I went to I did everything that I could. I had somebody that wanted to invest over $100,000 into the barns to get them going, and I could not get a permit for it. I could do nothing with this property. Yet they wanted all of the money for their taxes. I filed for an abatement when I purchased the property. They came a year ago in March for this abatement. Many things that have gone on with this property has been wrong in the 5 years that I've purchased it. Many things that have been said is not how it went. I don't know if you remember me, Mr. Labonte, but in November when I went to go vote, I had people that told me to go to Channel 8 News in regards to everything that was going on with this property because people knew that were standing by me with this property. So I spoke with Mr. Walker and Mr. Lavani the night that I went to go vote in November, and I said, I don't know what to do. They said, we don't know anything about this property except for it's non-conformed. I gave them a short story of what I was going through with this property, and nothing was said and nothing was done. I should have went to Channel 8 News and made this public, because what I have gone through, and I have notes, I had a bank check to pay my taxes and pay them off. That is when they said, oh, well, you can't sell it or do anything with your home. I'm like, what do you mean I can't sell it? Because there's no occupancy permit for your property. I'm like, what do you mean there's no occupancy permit for my property? I've lived there. They knew purchasing this property that I was going to live there and become a foster home, which I did. So now there's no occupancy permit to do anything with this property. But yet, when it was brought up to sell to, which Buford and McFarland, which is, it's sold to Gary McFarland, that's okay, and they can buy it from me, but yet nobody else could touch the property. There is more going on with this property than any of you would know. And I would like times, I didn't know about this meeting until today, and I would like time to be able to pull up all of my information, bring up all of my conversations that I have with different people from the town in regards to this property, and show you guys what I have been through with this property. Upon selling this property, they got their tax money. They got every bit of their tax money. But yet, not one thing was I ever able to do with this property. I've lost my home for my boys that I planned on raising my boys in. And not one person would help me get this taken care of, because every time I spoke with somebody, it was a no. I did not know which route to go. I did not know that we could be sitting here 5 years ago. And I think that's wrong, that it's who you are that will get you to right here. And if it wasn't for somebody else coming to me and telling me that this was going on, I would have never have known. And the only reason that I am here is because I have somebody who cared enough about what I went through with this property and my son's home to come and let me know that this was taking place. I asked you guys not to make it residential. When I sold it, I told them what they would have to do to get it conformed, which was to get a lot from an abutter, which was the only thing that I was told I could do. So for you guys to turn it to residential is allowing a sub-developer to get what they want. Don't do that. I fought because it was supposed to be agricultural. That's where somebody wants to live and raise a family. Please don't change it. Even though I went through what I did with the town and didn't get anywhere, I just ask that you guys keep it agricultural, conform it the way it is at 8.9 acres, and allow it be a farm, and allow the land to stay where it is around it. As far as the shooting range, I didn't want the shooting range, but that was the decision of not conforming the lot. If I had known that they had already talked about the shooting range prior to me purchasing the home, I would have never have purchased that home. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, you may.
You mentioned when you were working with a realtor and you first purchased the property, you were assured that the lots would be conforming. Who made that assurance?
That we had a discussion with the people who bought the previous Genis Holding Company. Fontaine Realty, me, and Eric Cousins were all in the meeting room. And Genis Holding Company assured me upon purchasing this property that it would be conformed after purchasing this property, that they would give up the amount of acreage needed in order to conform the lots.
Did you have any legal instrument that would have assured that would have happened without conditions?
Nope, it was just the meeting here at the City Hall when we did that.
Did you work with an attorney at all when you were going through buying the property?
No. Well, I did. We did the closing at an attorney's in Farmington, but it was Richard Morton. It was just to sign the papers.
You had a realtor working with you?
Yes, which was Fontaine Realty.
And that realtor knew that an assurance was being put on the table by a seller and did not seek to give you legal protection?
What do you mean?
Well, the story, I think there are certainly ways that the city could have and should have managed the process better. I want to start at the first point in your story, which jumped out to me, that you sat at a table with an out-of-state investment firm, which I can assure you had multiple lawyers working on documents. You had your realtor, and you have an attorney that you work with your realtor that represents you at closing, that if there were verbal assurances that an action would be taken to conform the lot, that your realtor or the attorney representing you at closing wouldn't have put a document together that would be signed to protect you. That word of mouth at a closing that isn't worth anything, especially if you're dealing with an investment company.
Well, at the time, I didn't know it was an investment company. I knew him as John. Every time that I spoke to him, it was John.
Okay.
I knew nothing about Genis Holding Company until after the fact with the gun range.
Did you ever go to an attorney to see whether you had any legal rights if you were made assurances before closing of what would be done?
No, because we knew that upon purchasing the property that it was 8.9 acres. because Eric did, tell us that it was 8.9 acres. I had come here many times. I went through the file many times. And before purchasing the property, we were told that it was, the buyers had illegally subdivided it. And I was like, well, wouldn't the town, and many people have said, wouldn't the town have to approve a divide? And Eric said, no, the town don't need to approve the first divide. And I'm like, okay, well, somebody should be held accountable for the divide. And that is when when I found out, because when I was speaking with them before, I was talking to John. After purchasing the property, I no longer spoke with John. I was dealing with a guy named Mule Gardner, which is part of the gun enthusiast or whatever in Maine. And JR was dealing with a guy by the name of Bob. So I never heard from John again. It was only this guy, Yule. Well, Yule was the guy to come to me to try to get me to get I've got a whole survey that they had done. They wanted to take one whole field and put a road through it. And he's like, well, this is, the proposal. We'll take and we'll conform the lot. We'll give you all of, this area out back if you, give this part of the acreage away, and we'll put a road up there to the shooting range. Work was done to put the shooting range out there. How they got permits to do it is beyond me, because no permits were supposed to be issued. It is pretty much set up. It has all of the wall, you know what I mean? Like the dirt's been piled there. The trees have been torn down going there. Everything else, but they had never mentioned anything about that before purchasing the property. It was just that not to worry, it would be conformed. As far as speaking to a lawyer about that, no. I never spoke to it because I took them on their word. Yes, it was stupid of me. It was my first time ever buying a home. I wanted it to, like I said, to make it into a home for my young men and, for fostering, to have animals and whatever need be. So I was stupid, yes. I was ignorant in my own part.
Well, I certainly wasn't suggesting that. I mean, this is part of the challenge.
Well, no, because
yeah.
I feel now that there was many things that I wish I would have done. But there was never anything, any time that we came and spoke about getting it conformed, there was no other way to get this land conformed. There was nothing else that I could do to get this lot conformed. There was no other way for me to make, to do anything with the barns or fix the barns. My only way to get this home taken care of and get the work done that needed to be done was to sell it to somebody who had money to take care of the home.
Did you attempt to engage? You attempted to engage with the other abutter to try to secure land?
Yes.
And how did that? Are you willing to? Can you share anything about how that went, or
which ones? I contacted John F. Murphy Home. I contacted Peter after the fact as well about getting an easement on his property. He said that he couldn't do. It was hard for him to do an easement because I guess they had done an easement on another parcel of property and something with land with brothers or something like that. It didn't work out right. So he said it would be hard, to get into. He can't say no, but it would be hard to allow the board of John F. Murphy Homes to allow me an easement, because even if I say I'm not going to use that property, he said it doesn't mean that if I ever sold the property that the new buyers wouldn't want to use that as something else. So he says he couldn't see that working. The few other ones that I had contacted, I'd never heard anything back from. I spoke with the guy whose property's right across the street. I talked to his brother, and he had said that his brother was in Mass or something like that, and he would have him get a hold of me, and I heard nothing further from him.
When you approached John F. Murphy Homes, did you, at any point, did you have someone working on your behalf talking to them about an easement and what would or wouldn't be in an easement to address John F. Murphy's concerns, or no?
It was just me. It was me. I did the footwork. Many people told me, like I had told you, to go to Channel 8 because the only thing that I could do to get any further with this property was to get a lawyer. I didn't have the money for a lawyer. I'm a single mom raising my boys, There was so much more I wanted with this home, and there was no help there, because every time that something was said, it was a no from the town. If I asked Eric, there's no other way, there's no other way, there's no other way. And then to be sitting here today and know that there was another way to get this conformed is just, it's a stab in the back. It really is. I sold this home for way less than what the town values it for. My kids and I are currently homeless. And I just feel that what has been done is wrong in every way. And you do know that I did speak to you guys, and I should have went to Channel 8. Yes, I may not have had somebody backing me up, you know, when I spoke with John F. Murphy Homes or any of the other abutters, but obviously they weren't going to do anything anyway. They weren't going to sell a parcel of land. They weren't going to give me an easement for the land. It's just the way that it is. So the only thing that you can do here is keep it at 8.9 acres because there's nobody out there that's going to give a parcel of that land. Even the new people who have purchased it has contacted John at Janus Holding Company, and they will not sell anything. Do I think it's right that if you guys conform our lot, that it's going to conform theirs as well? Yeah, I think it's wrong because they haven't done anything except for cause more hate and discontent of not allowing, you know, following back on their word by conforming the lot like they said. You know, I do believe that this should have been taken care of before the property was sold. I do believe that something should have been done where, you know, a parcel was taken from the other piece to make it conform to whatever it needed to be. It's 8.9 acres. It's livable. There's 2 barns. There's a garage. It's a makeshift garage. It's not like, you know, a huge, beautiful garage, but there's a garage and there's a beautiful home on it. And it's livable. So there's nothing wrong with the 8.9 acres. The only thing that ruins that is it's not 10 acres by Auburn standards.
Other councilors have questions, feel free.
Well, point I wanted to make too is that, you know, this is an option that was brought to, actually it should have gone to the planning board first before it went to council. And it was, this is a very Hail Mary type opportunity. I mean, to think this is going to happen is really saying a lot. So to say this is easy for somebody to suggest this and also to have it happen is a long ways away. It's not an easy fix, if it ever happens at all. So I'm not saying that, I just don't want you to feel bad that you didn't offer it, because really it's going to be a very tough sell regardless. And it needs to obviously go to planning board first before it comes here, and we don't know where that's going to go. So it is really kind of a Hail Mary kind of solution, so really don't feel bad that you didn't think of it, because it really is tough. But, you know, I'm sorry to hear about all the troubles you've had with this. It's too bad that a piece of property is non-conforming, that it got split in the first place the wrong way anyway. Shouldn't have happened. I think the problem happened back when the original split happened. But somebody didn't do the surveying and the correct thing to make sure that it was done correctly the first time. And that's the public, I mean, that's out there, and the buyers and sellers' responsibilities to do that, so. Thank you.
One last question, if you don't mind. There were back taxes.
Yes.
For how many years?
It was for 4 years.
And at any point, did city staff engage you or make you aware of the foreclosure process?
Yeah.
And were you willing to share a little bit about?
Well, I spoke with them in regards to the taxes, and they gave me a date by when the taxes had to be paid, which I understood. At that time, I was still in a battle with them charging me taxes for a property that they weren't allowing me to do anything with, or able to conform. So she ended up telling us we needed a set amount or whatever. And I said, okay. Well, we ended up we had a check for the taxes. I have a copy of it, and I will show proof to it or whatever. It was from the bank. And when we found out that we couldn't do anything, we couldn't even sell our home. They stuck us in a home that we now wanted to get rid of because we could do nothing. We didn't pay the taxes. I kept the check. We brought the money back to the bank because they said we couldn't sell it. And then they said that, oh, well, we didn't know you were living there. They knew we were living there. They knew that was the plan from the beginning. So many things, like I said, many things just, it wasn't right. It wasn't right. So yes, there was back taxes. I had the money for the back taxes. It wasn't until we just recently sold the house that they got the $50-something thousand in taxes from the sale of my home.
Thank you for coming up. I appreciate it.
Joe Gray, Soper's Mill Road. That's a copy of the check she brought to the city that didn't get cashed. And this is a copy of the paperwork where it would have been conformed. Nowhere on there does it say there's going to be a shooting range. And she's not the only one that didn't want the shooting range. I talked to the other abutters, and nobody wanted a shooting range there. So there's a lot more to this than has been presented. There's a lot more facts that I laid out last week, and I then sent an email to all of you on Thursday saying if you had any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you, and only one of you reached out. So I don't understand why you're not trying to get to the bottom of this. Did any of you watch the tape of the planning board meeting? Probably not. This is very.
Could you share a copy of that email with me? Oh, you didn't send it to me.
I did not. There's a whole lot of information that I've picked up on this property. So I do know quite a bit about what happened. I wasn't at a lot of this stuff. I can vouch for the fact that the planning office was not helpful because my wife and I looked to purchase it in 2010 as well. We were going to make it into a B&B because it's a very big, beautiful building. But we were also told no permits, no way to do it except to get abutters to give you the land, and no abutters were looking to do that. At that time, I went to the abutters that were home and I talked to them, and nobody was interested. And then my wife and I decided we didn't need the hassle and we'd just go someplace else. So I can kind of vouch for her because I talked with the planning office for about an hour about what can we do to make that a viable property so we can make it into a bed and breakfast. And I just kept getting the same answers. Only add land. So I know that that is what the planning office has said all along. That's it.
When you were looking at the property and you met with abutters, what were reasons that you heard about why they didn't want to sell?
Mostly because they didn't know about what was going on there, and they were unsure, A, who I was and what my interest was in it. Even though I said I wanted to do a bed and breakfast, they didn't know me from a hole in the ground. So they weren't real loose with comments about what they wanted to do, but they all liked the way it was right then.
Empty?
They liked their personal situations, not necessarily that building, because that building had been vandalized prior to Ms. Love buying it, and the barns were, all the copper was stripped out of it. They were not usable. The cupola on the second barn was falling in. It was not, if it had been permitted to take care of the property, then I could see the valuation that the city paid on it or placed on it, but it wasn't anywhere near worth what the city says it is. That old chicken barn has 1/2-inch plywood on the floors, so you can't put anything solid up there because it would just fall through. It needs work in order to make it a working farm. And without the permits, granted, some people would just have done it, but she's a by-the-rules person, and she doesn't believe in doing that. So it was not a usable property. The assessments were really high. She was left with no options. And then this past year, our own planning office is moving along with this process to fix the problem by rezoning it, and not once did they tell her about it, which is really strange. Why wouldn't they tell her that they're working on a fix? Because the fix wasn't coming from her, the fix was in to help the new owner. And that's just not right.
What was the date of the sale?
To her,
No,
July 26th of this year, she sold it to McFarland, which was the date that the planning board sent out the planning department sent out the meeting notice
I'm looking at the bottom of the agenda request form, and it's dated June 2nd, which was 6 weeks before a sale.
You're looking at what?
The agenda, the request that was put in for the zoning change, the bottom of it's dated June 2nd.
Did I see your copy? Because I didn't see any dates on the copies that we
It's
have.
right, it's right at the bottom. Half the text is cut out. That's why I was just trying to, because it's not in the packet, and why I scheduled this workshop outside of the planning board stuff is that there was enough raised the last meeting. I'm trying to, in my mind, piece together a timeline and where in that process did the timing break. If you want to come back up, you can.
The packet that was presented that these counselors did was undated.
Just show you.
Though somebody printed it off on May 20th.
Now, if this was something, I just have a question. If this was something going in front of the planning board, would the owner not get notification of this?
I would assume.
I never received anything from the town stating that this was going to the board. Not until, do you want to know when McFarland came to me about the property and I signed the paperwork? In April was when I signed the paperwork that I would sell my home. They kept pushing the date, I had a house to buy that I could have purchased in April. They pushed the date further to May. Then they pushed the date further to June. Then the closing finally took place in July.
So you entered into a contract to purchase and
April.
sale in April with a
Yes.
set closing date, and that closing date was what was extended?
Yes, we were supposed to, we did the contract in April. We were supposed to be closing in May. And then it went from May to June, June to July. And I was still the owner, but yeah, I was never notified that any of this paperwork had been drawn up.
Well, that's because it went to committee too, council committee, and then planning board took it from there.
I think what Mr. Gray is raising, and what was raised previously by Ms. Love, is that a process was being initiated to change the development rules on a property that was, at that time it was being proposed, was still owned by another party. And whether or not that party, whether they were under a contract to sell or otherwise, had a right to be informed. We're not attorneys here. You had a legal purchase and sale agreement that, even if you were informed, may not have given you the legal right to back out of a sale. But in terms of public notification and transparency, which I think is what is being raised by Mr. Gray, in terms of how the timelines played out. So,
Well, I was just wondering, because I heard you say June, and I'm like, because June wasn't, I hadn't even sold the house in June. So who would have brought this to the planning board in June? It wasn't.
yeah, it didn't go to the planning board. I was just looking at that date.
So why, I do have another question. If this went to the planning board in June.
No, it did not. What I'm raising is that when I look at the bottom of that sheet, I can see a file date, and the file date says June 2nd. That means at some point, probably on June 2nd or around that time, is when Councilor Walker had the form filled out and brought it to staff. There's still, when the city council committee met, when the planning board just met a few weeks ago on this topic for the first time.
Yes, I was here for that. So my question is, when I approached you and Mr. Walker in November about what I was going through with this property, and I said, I was notified that I should probably go to Channel 8 with it, and I was told, no, don't do that. There's other steps. I was never informed what the other steps were. Okay?
And I recall that conversation at Sherwood Heights, and I asked you to send me the details.
You asked me to call you, and I called you and left 2 messages on that phone number.
I never
got anything back.
I never had messages. I apologize, but I never had messages.
Okay, and nothing was ever done then. What initiated Mr. Walker to go and do something now for somebody else after I've already given up my home? Why now? Why not when I spoke to you in November before I gave up my home?
Other questions the council may have? Okay, thank you. Any other public comment? Mr. Herrick?
Hi, I'm the same person. I kind of like got a question or two. I went to the courthouse, and the deed does read change of deed July 26th, but June 2nd. I want to know who came and talked to somebody to start sending this to the planning board. Who initiated this to go to the planning board? Who went to who? Can you answer that?
Yeah, I did.
And before you brought this to the planning board, you also knew that there was somebody, the original owner of that property at that time, was willing to work a system or a way that she could stay there. I think the planning board did a superb job that night, and I just hope they stick with it, because spot zoning is wrong.
We're just gathering information about this tonight, but I sat at the original meeting at the planning board, and I would caution you that any action that you take with regard to changing the zone in order to resolve this dilemma is equitable for everyone else in the agricultural zone, that other 40% of the population. So I would be coming forward looking for a zone change as well, for whatever purpose I want. My son's getting out of the military, he's looking for a place to build a house, so I'd like a zone change for him. So whatever you do to resolve this dilemma with regard to a zone change in the agricultural zone is equitable to myself and the other people in the 40%. So I'd caution you that way. I think we can find a resolution without changing the zone. In other words, you could do a special exception for this one piece of property with a house on it. Because it has a residence on it, to my mind, puts it in a different situation, even though we've created two illegal parcels, which I don't understand why the larger parcel remains illegal. It's separated, so why make it illegal? It's separated. It was illegally separated, but it's not illegal in terms of what a piece parcel of land in agriculture fits. The one that's illegal is the little one with the house on it. And for somebody that wanted to make a residence in that building and do that, then we ought to look for a way to make an exception for that. On the Hatch Road, there's a piece of property that the house burned recently. It's on an illegal piece of land. It doesn't meet the regulations for agriculture's piece. But because the family owned it, I'm told it by the planning department that it's grandfathered forever. So I can go up there and buy this piece of illegal property, and because the land is grandfathered, I can build a house on that piece of property, according to what the planning department's telling me. And I don't understand why that same application can't fit this piece of land, this illegal piece of land that we're talking about. That we need to get out of the sandbox and take another look at this and say, hey, here's something that can work, so that I don't have to apply it to all the other 40%, because I'm telling you, if you do this, you're going to have a long line here of people wanting to do this. Just a caution. Thank you.
Good evening. Jim McPhee, 72 Hillcrest Street. I was not intending to come down here. I was watching this on TV and thought that I'd come down to add a little bit of clarity to what's going on. I know this project had been worked on for a number of years without success.
Could you clarify whether you're here representing?
I'm here, not that it matters, but I'm here representing Gary McFarland. In April of this year, after to clarify, Mr. Labonte would remember. Mr. Labonte and I believe Mr. Kroll invited Buford and McFarland to look at tax-acquired properties in the city to try to help out, to see if there were ones that they could use and put back on the tax rolls. That's a very good thought. That's something that's been done in the past many times and to many times success. One of the properties they showed them happened to be 1863 Pownal Road. Mr. McFarland looked at that property and saw it for his own use. He happens to have a girlfriend who he wants to be in the same house with. She has horses, sheep, a couple dogs, a couple cats. Mr. McFarland's desire has been to purchase the property, improve it, bring it back to what that Queen Anne house used to look like, and occupy it as his own residence. He has taken the step, as you heard earlier, at the planning board to even offer for consideration a deed restriction, which he's willing to put on his property. As you probably know, neither the planning board nor the council can positively act on a rezoning using a condition. You cannot condition a rezoning. You can use it for consideration in what you're doing, and I would encourage you to do so. That also has been done in the past. I was brought onto the project after a number of months with Mr. McFarland, working with the planning department to ask if I could find a way to help. That was in April of this year. After looking at it, I made several suggestions. Variance is not possible. It cannot satisfy any of the requirements. So that would never be possible in front of the planning board. A correction to the property of adding more property, of course, it's a straightforward way. In that effort, I contacted Genesis. They would not return my several calls. I contacted the John F. Murphy Foundation and had several conversations with, I'll call Ms. Bentley. I believe her first name may have been Ann Bentley. She was going to bring it in front of their board. They were at the time working, of course, with securing the property up by the lake for use. They've not responded positively, so we've moved on for that. That is the only property outside of Genesis who could give property to this to make it whole. So now there's no way to make this property whole. The only two actions left would be what's called a non-action letter. That was something that was pioneered during the early 90s, during the mortgage crises, when banks would not give mortgages if properties came up with a violation of a zoning ordinance. Sometimes these cannot be corrected, and a process called non-action letters was developed. It is used in the Code Enforcement Officer's manual and has been used throughout the state. There are several letters of example in the first issue of that. 3 of the 4 originate from Auburn. This process works good. I understand the staff's reluctance to use a non-action letter. The main problem with a non-action letter is that some future council could say we don't like that action and revoke it. I know of one case in the state, a more recent one, where that occurred, but they were talking about a new subdivision in new homes. I only used non-action letters, and I used more than anybody in the state for existing development that could not be corrected when it was a de minimis change, was not going to change anything with the character of the neighborhood. I think a non-action letter works here. A non-action letter works because it says we recognize the deficiency. We're just not going to take any action to correct it. We're going to look, and therefore you can continue using it in the way anyone else would use a house. If that's not the purpose of a non-action letter, then what is it? If you can say yes, we won't take any action against it, but we won't issue building permits or any permits for it, then why would the state and why would everybody be using non-action letters? Because they would have no purpose. So I disagree with not being able to issue permits. One also has to remember that the non-action letter was an official way to let banks know that the city was not going to enforce an ordinance. There is no law that says any city has to enforce any of its ordinances. Officers do not have to enforce every speed limit. They usually do it when you're more than 10 miles over the speed limit. It's just the same. You do not have to enforce an ordinance. This was a formal way of letting banks know so they could issue mortgages. So while there are good reasons why not, the only people who can challenge it is a future council. And I'm going to ask this council, if that was in front of you now, say this property is sold, the building permits goes to it, it's all renovated, it's out there operating just like it used to as a farm, would any of you in a year or two going to raise an issue and say, we don't like that decision, close down that place, tear out all the improvements and move out? I wouldn't think so. And I think if that was challenging court, there wouldn't be a court that would stand behind you. So that was one of my suggestions. The last one was rezoning. There are 3 ways rezoning can come forward. We could have got 25 signatures, gone through a normal process of going straight to the planning board, coming to you. The planning board could initiate it. The planning staff did not want to take that step. The council can initiate it. 2 councilors took that move after I talked with Mr. Walker. So for the people behind me, I was the one who changed the matrix of how this was moving forward. And I went to Mr. Walker for that assistance. I went to Mr. Walker for a number of reasons. One, Leroy and I have known each other for many years. We've worked together. Leroy knows the area, and he's the counselor from that area. And he, thankful to Ms. Gilbert, she came along with that. I think she saw the
Which I was
benefit of it.
hoping would bring it to the point that it's at right now, open for discussion.
Pardon me?
I was hoping that it
Oh,
would come
okay.
here for discussion.
And so very quickly,
Oh, it ended
it did get to the rezoning. I brought it forward. It went through the process. It's now at the planning board at a tabled public hearing. I don't know if other information coming out of this meeting can be made part of their decision. That would be something that a lawyer would have to answer, because there's still a public hearing going on in front of the planning board. But there is nothing nefarious going on that Mr. Buffard is bringing forward. He's looking for a house for the rest of his life. He wants to improve the house. The property is going to be returned to be used for farming purposes, as it always was. If it goes to rezoning, yes, that legitimizes Genesis property. If it goes to a non-action letter, it will not, because the properties will still be in violation. And one last comment about, to answer my friend Mr. DeGrosia's last statement, is why would the larger property be penalized and not the smaller one? When I first started working for the city, there was a provision that said that if any property be divided in violation, that property could not get a building permit. So somebody divides a property, they give the smaller property away, that property can't get a building permit. One of the worst days that I had with 2 people, a young couple who had lived down in Lewiston, a teacher and a nurse. They were sold an illegal property, and then they couldn't get a building permit for it. And I, right along with them, cried about that. I couldn't do anything to make it happen because the property owner had enough property, and this was, again, out in Stelshofen. He had enough property that he didn't care, and then I found out he was going to sell another property illegally. And then those people, and he was just going to keep the money. So the ordinance got changed to any property so created or retained. So the person with the larger property who's making all the money gets penalized just right along with the person he sold the property that cannot be used. So that's why the larger property gets penalized. I'd be glad to answer any questions if I can. Thank you.
Before you leave, Mr. McPhee, you and I talked, and when we talked, we never discussed who or anyone was buying that land at the time, because I never asked you if anyone was. And when you asked me about the property and the zoning, I said, it is time for this zone to be changed because it has been a headache for the owner of that house for years. That's what I said to you. And you said there is only 2 different zones that maybe we could change it to. And then if someone purchased that home, it would be, there would be a lot possibly that another house could be built if it was purchased under a 5-acre or a 3-acre, whatever the term was that I asked. And that was the only discussion that I made sure that we understood about the property and the zoning.
That's 100% accurate. We never discussed who I was working for or...
I didn't even know you were working for.
Or the purpose of moving forward. Also, at the planning board meeting, I also was not going to speak. I spoke at the very end about a non-action letter. I may or may not have identified that I was working for Mr. Bouffard at that time. I'm not sure.
Thank you. Glad you were watching television.
This is one of my favorite Monday night shows.
Invite Eric back up. We're not looking for any formal council direction tonight. The planning board process is still ongoing. This is a chance for there to be public comment and for people to hear more about the situation. But is there anything questions that were asked that you want to have a chance to answer, or information shared that you want to clarify or give additional perspective on?
Staff has, from the beginning, recommended that the property owners try to work together to adjust the lot size to fix the violation. We didn't think that there was a strong likelihood of getting a variance because I don't think the criteria could easily be met in this case. I think you might be able to make an argument for it and give it your best try in front of the Board of Appeals. But we didn't recommend that because I don't think it meets that statutory test, and I don't think we could support it in front of the Board of Appeals for that reason. And same thing with a zone change. We haven't recommended a zone change. We've talked about it being an option, but we didn't recommend that as a way to fix a zoning violation when they hadn't worked through all the possibilities of correcting it by correcting the lot size violation itself. We did connect the property owners in that area to try to have a discussion on their own. We answer questions for people inquiring about buying properties all the time. We try to provide as much information as we can, but we really can't offer them any legal protections in that process. We try to give them everything we have in our files, explain the situation, and they need to go out and make their own decisions and hire their own counsel if necessary. The property owners have never been anything but very nice and very pleasant to work with, and anytime you have somebody losing their home to foreclosure, whether it's tax foreclosure or mortgage foreclosure, it's a very emotional thing. Staff doesn't enjoy, having to witness that process. It's very difficult. But we have to provide the information and follow the ordinances as they are in place, and I think that's kind of where we are now. We did show a web mapping application to Bouffard and McFarland Builders. They had inquired about tax-acquired properties, and they were being discussed at the council committee level, I believe, at the time. And we thought it was a good way to showcase what we can do with GIS. We met with them, and they inquired about a number of tax-acquired properties periodically after that. While they went through the process. I think some of them are now queued up and getting ready for sale. I don't know for sure if they've been to you as a body yet or if they've just been through the committee. But we provide information about those parcels all the time. So I don't really have anything else to add, I don't think. Nope, I think that's it. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
We got 2 ends on the Jordan School Road, one from the Pownal Road and then we got one from 136. On changing zones or I guess the distances from one zone to another zone was, I think, way back misunderstood when you had property lines moving into the Jordan School Road. Can you remember when the last time a zone down there was allowed to be changed and moved into the Jordan School Road from the Pownal Road, and the same thing coming the other way from 136 onto the Jordan School Road? Because you've got new houses on both ends, trailers on one end, a brand new, beautiful home up on the hillside of the side coming off the Pownal Road, for instance. The thing that people get worried about, you may change a zone or they stop the zone short of Mrs. Love's property, for instance. I don't understand why anybody would ever stop that zone where they stopped it whenever they did it, which to me is kind of crazy. Why didn't they just go to the Durham line and have it over with when there been any kind of headaches about your size property today? Because the Pownal Road was rezoned a few years back because that was all agricultural too. I don't know when you made them changes, but you've got, it's like I'm saying, you've got distances that you've come into the Jordan School Road that most anyone that's lived there in the last 100 years thought that was all agricultural, all the way to the Pownal Road, all the way to 136. But then you got homes that start to creep up the hills, creeping in to the real farmland, I guess is what we would call it. Can you tell us when you think that all started to happen?
I can pull the files for any property. I know from just drawing from memory on the 136 side, I think the line is kind of odd and follows a stream or a floodplain a little ways into Jordan School Road, but I'd really have to pull the maps and look at the history.
And would you tell me when we changed the zone? I know it was a few years back on the South Witham Road that allowed up around the corner, brings you back to the old Danville Road. There was some zoning changed in there too that allowed, I don't even know what they call that road in there, some golf
Yep,
road.
it was near the alpaca farm.
Yeah.
And
Would you tell us, if you could, when that zone was changed and how far in it really goes on South Witham Road?
That happened while I've been here for just over 10 years, and that one happened while I was here. I can pull the dates. I don't think anything's changed on the other Jordan School Road since I've been here.
But that's probably the question, that how come they can continue to creep in? Because I can understand 25 feet off the main road, but you're talking 200 feet off the main road now, and pretty soon it'll be 300 feet if somebody doesn't understand what's going on. And most people that have lived out there are wondering or asking questions, when is the line going to stop? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Any other questions? Joe, did you have another question you wanted to ask? If you don't mind, Derek.
Mr. Cousins just said it's sad when somebody loses their house to foreclosure, and that's true. But this house wasn't lost to foreclosure. The city never foreclosed. They gave Buford McFarland the inside track that this house was never going to be conformed. So Buford McFarland went and bought the house for $160,000, whereas if they'd followed the policy that's set forth in foreclosure, he would have had to pay 50% of the assessed value. The assessed value was approximately $400,000. He would have had to pay $200,000. So in reality, we screwed her out of $40,000.
Move on to the next item.
I would like to just say that I sat in Dennis's office about a week ago, and as far as what Dennis told me that the city did and how they handled this, I believe him, and I don't think that the city in any way tried to screw Mrs. Lovely out of that property by showing McFarland or anybody else, because all real estate people have the right to come in and ask the same questions that he asked. We may not always like the answers that are given, but Eric and Dennis is not going to tell people that two different stories. They're going to tell them the same thing. Rather, we feel it's right or wrong, that's the way the story is going to come out of them. And I because people were saying, well, they know Leroy had something going with McPhee. Leroy didn't have anything. So I went to Dennis and said, did you have something going with Mr. McPhee that I don't know about? Because I didn't know what was going on. He didn't either know what was going on. And whatever you had said to the real estate people, we said we felt that it was properly said to the real estate person. So I don't think anybody was doing anything crooked here. They were trying to lay out the rules and the regulations the best they could.
Thanks, Counselor. Next item